More than 1,300 signatures on a letter to the government of the United States. The substance of the request: build the tools to be able to slow us down.
Us, meaning the industry that's writing the letter.
Exactly. Among the signatories, the CEO of Anthropic, OpenAI's chief scientist, the head of AIsafety at Google.
And at the end of July, OpenAI and Anthropic formally endorsed that letter as companies. An employee petition became the official corporate policy of two of the world's leading labs.
And before we go any further, I have to draw one distinction, because without it, this whole episode will be misunderstood. This is not a call for a pause. Nobody here is asking anyone to stop the work this year.
No, this is a call to build the capability to slow down, meaning today the world has no tools with which it could deliberately put the brakes on the frontier of AI research, even if it wanted to. And the letter says, build those tools now before they're needed.
That's the difference between a break and breaking.
Perfectly put. They're asking for a break, not for breaking. And that's why it could be signed by people who are simultaneously accelerating every single day. Because formally there's no contradiction here.
And informally?
Informally, it's one of the strangest documents this industry has ever produced. And today we're going to take it apart, along with all the other breaks. The legal ones, the diplomatic ones, and the ones the authors of the AI 2027 scenario have started proposing themselves.
Let's start with the chronology, because it begins earlier than you'd guess from the media noise around this letter.
It begins in June. On June 5th, Anthropic published a number that went around the whole industry. More than 80% of the code going into their own code base today is written by Claude. And right away the caveat, because it's mandatory here. That is a vendor's statement. Anthropic is reporting it, about its own company, and nobody has verified it from the outside.
So we treat it as a statement, not as a measurement.
As a statement. But what's interesting is what Anthropic did that same day. It didn't stop at bragging about the number. At the same time, it called for a global pause in development.
The same day?
The same day. The company tells the world, our artificial intelligence already writes most of our code, and that means AI may soon be able to build itself without human involvement, and therefore the world ought to be able to stop it. 7 weeks later, the letter comes out.
6 days later, the CEO of that company says the same thing, and on television.
June 11th, on ABC News. So that's one newsroom's reporting. I'll flag that. Dario Amodei says that safeguards in AI are, I quote, not in step with the pace of progress. And he adds a sentence CEOs don't usually say, that the government should have the right to block or deter the deployment of a model if an independent assessment shows unacceptable risk.
A CEO asking for the state to be able to forbid him from shipping his own product.
That's how it sounds. Although notice the construction, if an independent assessment shows. So the condition is the existence of an independent assessment, which, as we'll see in a moment, barely exists anywhere.
So the break didn't appear out of nowhere at the end of July. It had been building since the start of the summer.
It had. And there's one more thing that has to be said in the same breath, because otherwise this sounds like the announcement of a breakthrough. That same Anthropic explicitly denies that recursive self-improvement has already happened. Their argument is that judgment is missing. Claude executes goals given by humans. It doesn't decide which goals are worth pursuing in the first place.
Which matters because that's exactly the threshold the whole scenario turns on.
That threshold, yes. And it has not been crossed. What's been crossed is the volume of code, not independence in choosing the direction.
All right, back to the letter. What's actually in it?
It came out on July 28th. The title is Pacing the Frontier. Behind it are two organizations that work on AI safety standards. And the core of it is in 3 sentences. First, The leading companies believe they may be close to automating AI research. Second, there's a real risk that capabilities will accelerate, quote, beyond our ability to understand or control. Third, the world today has no tools for deliberately setting that pace.
And the demand?
That the United States government support an international effort to build such tools. The ones specifically named are compute transparency, joint evaluations, verification technologies, export controls, and international forums.
Let's be precise about the numbers, because they're circulating online in several versions.
They are, and some of them are inflated. At publication, there were 1,178 signatures. In August, it passed 1,300. The higher numbers you'll run into in aggregators have no confirmation, so we don't use them.
And the names?
The names are stronger than the count. Dario Amodei, CEO of Anthropic. Jared Kaplan, their Chief Science Officer. Jakub Pachocki, Chief Scientist at OpenAI. Mark Chen from OpenAI. Anka Dragan, VP of AIsafety at Google. The Chief Scientist of Meta AI. This is not a list of activists. This is a list of people who decide what gets trained next quarter.
And 2 days later, the companies, as legal entities, sign on to the same thing.
OpenAI and Anthropic, on July 28th and 29th. And on July 30th, Sam Altman, before the Senate, concedes that AI development may need to be slowed down.
And here I want to put down this episode's first verification statement, because it's a fairly uncomfortable one. The AI 2027 scenario predicted breaking, only it predicted it as something arriving from the outside, as a reaction from government, from an oversight committee, from public opinion after some kind of shock.
That's right. In the scenario, the industry is the thing being braked, not the thing asking for a break. Reality gave us the reverse order. The labs wrote the petition, and the government so far hasn't acted on it.
So the scenario didn't so much get it wrong as get the direction of movement wrong.
And that's a situation we run into again and again this season. The mechanism checks out, the casting doesn't.
And one more voice from that same summer, because it goes furthest of all.
On July 14th, Demis Hassabis, then still the CEO of DeepMind, called for the creation of a global AI overseer under United States leadership. Modeled, and this is a surprising model, on FINRA, the securities industry's own self-regulatory body.
Why that one specifically?
Because it's a body that grew up inside the industry, but has real authority over the industry's participants.
And the authority Hassabis is talking about is the maximum one, stopping the entire industry.
The CEO of Google's biggest research lab, asking for an institution that could switch him off.
Yes, in fairness, I'll add that some of the stronger sentences attributed to him in that interview couldn't be confirmed at the source, so I'm only giving the confirmed core. But the core is strong enough. And 3 weeks later, Hassabis stopped being CEO of DeepMind, which we covered in episode 14.
So in a single quarter, we have the CEO of Anthropic, the CEO of DeepMind, and 1,300 people from the industry asking for the same thing.
For a framework in which somebody other than themselves could say, stop. Let's hold on to that conclusion, because in a moment we are going to see how the institutions that already have such a framework are doing with it.
And now we move to the part where we have to correct ourselves. And this is not a small thing.
No, this is the biggest correction of the whole season.
Across 13 episodes, we repeated a sentence that appeared in 10 of them. It went roughly like this. The authors themselves admitted that reality is moving slower. Their medians have shifted by 2 or 3 years, toward the end of the decade.
That sentence was true. In January of 2026, and that is exactly when we froze it into our fact base.
And on April 2nd, the team that wrote AI 2027 published a forecast update for the first quarter. with a subtitle, and this is a subtitle that deserves a sentence of its own. We told you we'd be updating in both directions.
And they moved their medians by roughly 18 months. Earlier, not later.
So the move went in the opposite direction from the one we talked about all through Season 1.
Exactly the opposite. And this isn't a matter of interpretation, because we have it in the lead author's own words. Daniel Kokotajlo, on August 7th, a week ago, on the podcast of the legal outlet Lawfare. I quote, "At the time we started writing AI 2027 was my median. By the time we published it, 2028 was my median, because I had sort of updated towards slightly longer timelines. Then, briefly, towards the end of last year, my timelines lengthened even more, up to 2030. And then now they're going back down. And so now I would say 2028, probably something like that."
So the full arc, 2027, 2028, 2030, and back to 2028.
4 positions, 1 person, 15 months. We caught the third one and told it as if it were the last.
Let's also say how the authors rate the pace of reality, because there was a change there too.
In February, they assessed that reality was running at between 58 and 66% of the pace of their scenario. In July, they raised that assessment to roughly 75%, so 3/4.
And here a caveat is needed, because otherwise this sounds stronger than it should.
It's needed, and it's a serious one. Both of those readings are the forecaster's self-assessment. It's the authors grading their own forecast. The level is independently corroborated, because an independent tracker in June gave a similar value, around 70%. But the trend itself, that move from 58 to 75, is one measurement series from one organization. So we say, the direction of the revision is checkable, the rate of convergence is not.
There's one more thing that has to be added, so we don't turn the authors into bigger enthusiasts than they are.
The measuring instrument we talked about in episode 15, the time horizon metric from Meta, the independent organization that measures model capabilities, shows a doubling roughly every 3 months. The authors settled on 4 months for Kokotajlo and 4.5 for Eli Liefland. So they updated toward the instrument, but not all the way. That's a conservative choice, and it's worth noting, because in the commentary, it usually gets lost.
And the last thing in this block, probably the most commonly confused, there is no such thing as the author's median.
There isn't. This is a team, not an oracle. Kokotajlo today says 2028. Eli Liefland, for that same threshold, the model that takes over a programmer's job, says mid-2030. And Scott Alexander describes his most likely scenario as 2031, and points out himself that his predictions were longer than those of the median person on that team from the very beginning.
So the spread inside a single group is 3 years.
3 years on a threshold that the whole scenario places in March of 2027. So if somebody quotes the authors of AI 2027 say, you always have to ask, which author?
There's also a number Kokotajlo gives about risk, and it's probably the strongest sentence in the entire dossier.
He puts it at roughly a 70% chance that we end up with an AI takeover or some very large catastrophe of that kind. And you have to say precisely what fits inside that range, because it isn't only loss of control in the movie sense. It also includes concentration of power, the scenario in which humans keep control of AI. Only very, very few humans do.
That's 2 completely different ends of the world thrown into one number.
2 different ones, and he flags that himself. He also adds something that personally worries me more than the number does. He says that people working inside Anthropic and OpenAI regularly explain to him that he should shorten his predictions. Back to 2027, 2028.
So the insiders are more pessimistic than the forecaster everyone considers a pessimist.
That's how he reports it.
And that's second-hand testimony, of course. So let's treat it as a report and not a measurement. But the report is unambiguous.
All right, now the second correction, and this one concerns episode 10.
We said there, the authors explicitly note that this is a forecast, not a recommendation. That sentence stopped being true on July 9th.
What happened then?
The team published a document called AI 2040, PlanA, subtitled The Least Bad Plan We Currently Know Of. 6 authors, including Kokotajlo and Lifland. And this is no longer a description of what might happen. It's a proposal for what should happen.
So they crossed a line they had drawn for themselves in April of 2025.
They crossed it deliberately, and the content is radical. The core is joint United States and Chinese control over the supply of new chips. On top of that, monitored data centers, published training runs, caps on the capability frontier, and dispersal of research so that nobody holds a monopoly.
And the mechanism that holds it all together?
They call it mutually assured compute destruction.
It's a deliberate echo of the Cold War. Mutually assured destruction of computing power. Instead of nuclear arsenals, we have data centers, and the guarantee of stability is that each side is able to destroy the other's compute.
What else is in the plan?
Reaching human genius level AI only around the middle of the 2030s, and then a pause for alignment, which, by the way, is where the 40 in the title comes from.
How was it received?
At the extremes. Nate Soares, one of the most pessimistic figures in this world, said it was the best concrete vision of a positive future I've ever seen spelled out, bar none. And Ramez Naam, a technologist and writer, said it was a recipe for authoritarianism, and that these proposals violate at least the spirit of the First and Fourth Amendments to the American Constitution.
So the same document is simultaneously the best vision and a recipe for dictatorship.
And both assessments are coherent within their own frames. Because if you genuinely believe the risk is 70%, then global control over chips is a small price. And if you believe it isn't, then you have just built the infrastructure for surveilling every computation on Earth.
And the last publication in this series is a very recent one.
August 5th, 9 days ago. How to pace the US frontier. 4 options for domestic regulation. One of them is genuinely inventive, so I'll quote it. AI research may only be conducted or assisted by models trained at least 9 months earlier.
So the frontier keeps advancing, but with its own tools from 3 quarters ago.
Exactly. You introduce a fixed lag between what you're able to build and what you're building with. The feedback loop that the entire acceleration spiral in the scenario rests on gets stretched out in time. And that is the only realistic answer today to the scenario's idea of a model line built only after the brake has been pulled. Not as an existing line, as a proposal on paper.
All right, so we have an industry asking for a break and forecasters drafting a design for one. What are the people who actually have a break in their hands doing?
And this is where we get to today's punchline. In 2026, everybody is making law, and practically nobody is enforcing it.
Let's start with the European Union, because the date there is very fresh.
On August 2nd, 12 days ago, the enforcement phase of the EU's AI Act kicked in. The Commission, through the EU AI Office, received formal powers over providers of general-purpose models. It can demand information. It can run its own evaluations of models. It can summon people to hearings. It can conduct inspections at company premises.
And the sanctions?
Restricting a model or withdrawing it from the union market. And fines of up to 15 million euros, or 3% of global turnover, whichever is higher.
3% of global turnover at companies this size is billions.
Billions. But now the most interesting part, and this is a fact that goes completely unremarked in the press.
The obligations themselves for these models have existed since August 2nd, 2025, which is to say, for a year.
Hold on, the obligations were in force for a year.
In force for a year, and for that entire year, nobody in Brussels had the instruments to enforce them. The law existed, enforcement didn't. 12 months of slippage between the letter and the tool.
And since August 2nd?
And since August 2nd, the tool exists. And to this day, meaning for 12 days, there is not a single publicly named proceeding, not one fine. The AI office states that its instrument of first choice remains conversations about technical compliance.
So we have the power to pull a model off the market and 0 cases.
0 cases. And that's the pattern you're now going to see in every jurisdiction that follows.
Then let's go through the states. Federally.
Federally, it's worse than our reporting in Season 1 suggested. The Presidential Executive Order from 2025 set 3 deadlines for 3 different bodies. All 3 were missed. The Department of Commerce did not publish its list of onerous state laws. The Federal Trade Commission has only issued a proposed policy statement. It closed consultations at the end of July, and there is no final act. The Federal Communications Commission, no confirmed proceeding.
And that special legal task force at the Department of Justice, the one we talked about in episode 13.
0 suits of its own to this day. The only recorded action by that task force went in a direction we did not expect. On April 24th, the Department of Justice intervened in a private case on the side of an AI company against a state.
The federal government backed a company against a state authority.
The company was XAI, the state was Colorado, and it was the first such intervention in history.
And here we have this episode's 3rd correction, because that case bears on a sentence we said back in episode 13.
We said states like California and Colorado have their own AI laws. The second half of that sentence is untrue. The Colorado law is not in force. On April 27th, a court suspended its enforcement in exactly that case. And on May 14th, the governor signed a new law that repeals the old framework and re-establishes it, with the main obligations starting only on January 1st, 2027.
So we said something was in force when it had been blocked 3 months earlier.
Yes. Without softening it, that was our mistake.
But at the same time, one state did something nobody else in the world has done.
Illinois, on July 6th. The first state to require annual independent external audits of frontier models, not self-reporting, not declarations, an audit by an outside body every year.
Scope?
A revenue threshold of $500 million, plus a compute threshold. So it's aimed at the largest players. Reporting of critical incidents within 72 hours. Whistleblower protection. Fines of up to $3 million.
And that, I think, is the closest existing answer to the question we used as the title of episode 13. Who watches the Watchmen?
That is the answer. Except its reach is a single state. For comparison, in 2026, 29 states passed some sort of AI legislation, over 100 laws. Regulation of frontier models shows up in exactly one of them.
And the pace?
Slower than in 2025. Companion chatbots and data centers dominate. Almost nobody is interested in the capability frontier.
What about California? Because the law there is in force.
In force since January 1st. Transparency reports before deploying a frontier model. Incident reporting within 15 days. And within 24 hours where there's a risk of death. Fines of up to $1 million. And as of August 14th, 0 publicly confirmed enforcement actions by the State Attorney General.
So, 8 months in force and not a single case.
Not one. Come back to that pattern. The law is there.
The enforcement isn't.
There's one more federal item left, and it's the most interesting one. Government review of models before launch.
June's executive order on frontier models established a framework for voluntary, pre-deployment government access to covered models, up to 30 days before deployment. It explicitly rejected mandatory licensing. The deadline for publishing that framework passed on August 1st.
And?
On August 4th, the White House discussed it with Meta, Nvidia, Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, and refused to publish the document. It is to remain classified. It's being developed by a group led by the National Security Agency.
So the rules for reviewing models that will reach 1 billion people are secret.
They are secret. AIpolicy Press wrote that for 8 weeks, the process operated informally, without published criteria, defined timelines, or any legal basis, and warned that something like this can harden into the permanent structure of frontier AI governance before anyone on the outside gets to weigh in.
There's one more break. This one applied voluntarily and technically interesting.
On August 11th, 3 days ago, Anthropic started marking Claude's outputs with invisible watermarks. A statistical pattern woven into the text itself, plus metadata in an industry standard. And most importantly, globally, not only in the Union, even though formally it's implementation of an EU provision on labeling synthetic content.
The reaction?
Strong pushback online. This is, incidentally, the first case this season in which European regulation genuinely changed the behavior of a product worldwide.
Before we move on, we have to give credit to one break that really does work. Otherwise, this episode will sound as though no state is enforcing anything.
Fair, because one of them is enforcing very effectively. Except that it applies to hardware, not to models. On May 31st, the American Export Control Bureau changed the rule. A license is now required for any entity whose ultimate parent sits in China or Macau, regardless of where that entity is physically located.
So the criterion moved from where are the chips going to whose company is this?
Exactly. That closes the data center loophole in Singapore and Malaysia. And on July 13th, Nvidia removed more than half of the companies from its list of approved buyers in Asia, with contract verification, end-user interviews, and physical inspections of data centers.
That sounds like the only part of this puzzle where a declaration translates into an action.
Because here there is an enforceable object. A chip can be counted at customs, model weights can't. And let me add the other side, because it's equally important. This channel wasn't closed only by Washington. Since January of 2026, Chinese customs have had instructions not to let Nvidia's newest chips in, despite valid American licenses.
So Beijing cut off its own imports.
Cut them off itself to support domestic manufacturers. That's a correction to the picture we had in Season 1, that the states are blocking and China wants to buy. Today, both sides are restricting in both directions. And I'll add that between mid-July and today, there are no documented new decisions by the American Bureau and no official response from Beijing. So this break too has been sitting still for the past month.
Now the last block. Because the AI 2027 scenario predicted that the break would come from the international level, a joint treaty, a joint model.
What the scenario called Consensus 1, a jointly designed model under the supervision of both superpowers, an exchange of chips, verification. And this is where the divergence from reality is the largest in the whole episode.
Because
Instead of one shared table, we have two separate ones. On July 16th and 17th, at a conference in Shanghai, Xi Jinping announced the creation of the World AI Cooperation Organization. 29 countries signed the founding agreement, headquarters in Shanghai. China is positioning itself as the leader of a new global order in artificial intelligence.
And the other side?
The other side is a structure attached to the United Nations. On July 1st, an independent international scientific panel on AI published its first report. 40 experts selected from more than 2,600 candidates, co-chaired by Joshua Bengio and Maria Ressa. And in early July, Geneva hosted the inaugural session of the Global Dialogue on AI Governance.
So, two parallel processes, each with its own patron.
Two blocks. Analysts at Brookings wrote flat out that the summer of AI summits revealed a deepening gulf between the States and China. And the US-China summit in May ended with no breakthrough on chips.
And that's the fourth verification statement. The scenario predicted a joint model under a treaty. Reality delivered two competing forums and declarations.
Forums and declarations. Not a joint model, not an exchange of hardware, not a verification mechanism. Institutions did get created, two of them, and against each other.
Let's leave one more observation, because this one concerns all of us who tell these stories.
You mean the media?
The media. On January 7th, the Washington Post published a piece arguing that AI doomsday predictions look sillier as the technology develops.
And on July 9th, that same Washington Post ran a straight news piece about PlanA. The headline? He warned AI could lead to extinction. Now he says there's a better path.
So a reversal in half a year.
A reversal on one point, and that's an important caveat. Because the April update to the medians, the one we talked about half an hour ago, the shift 18 months earlier, got essentially no pickup in the mainstream press. The press noted the remediation plan. It did not note the change in the forecast that justifies the plan.
That's an interesting asymmetry. The solution is newsworthy, the diagnosis isn't.
And that's usually how it works. For that matter, we spent half a year repeating an out-of-date version, relying on the same information cycle.
Let's sum up what we established today without drawing conclusions about the whole. We're saving those for the end of the season. The industry asked for a break and formally signed its own name to the request. The scenario's authors moved from forecasting to recommending and pulled their medians earlier. The union got its tools and didn't use them. The states blew past their own deadlines, and the only federal move went to defend a company against a state. One state introduced real audits, and the world, instead of a treaty, got two forums competing with each other.
And all of this assumes one thing, that this machine is actually going to keep accelerating, and that there'll be something left to break.
And in 2026, it turned out that the hardest barrier is neither legal nor algorithmic.
It's made of concrete, copper, and silicon.